the Hong Kong Philharmonic Orchestra presents Wagner's Ring Cycle, Part 3, Siegfried. Well, wow, what a way to end an act of opera. Welcome back, Sue and everybody. Let's talk a little bit about how that closed off.
Yeah, sure. Have you ever heard so many words at one time in one act of opera?
It is very wordy.
I think there might be as many surtitles for Act 1 of Siegfried as there is for entire Puccini operas.
I wouldn't be surprised about that.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just move on quickly to Act 2 and what we're about to see. And we mentioned before that Mima's in this for the long game. He spent years preparing Siegfried for what he wants him to do. And now we meet another character who's in it for the long game, and that's Alberich. What's he been up to?
Well, and he's Mima's brother too, right? So we have two long game brothers. Alberich is waiting. He's waiting outside the Cave of Envy, or the Cave of Spite, which is where Fafner is guarding the ring, the Tarnhelm, and the Hoard of Gold, none of which we saw in Die Walküre. Those disappeared. They were missing in action, actually, as were Alberich and Mima. So Alberich is waiting to see what's going to happen. And the Wanderer, in his sort of to-do list before he gives up all power, a little bit like President Obama is doing right now in the United States of America.
Indeed.
The Wanderer comes on stage, and remember, this is Wotan in his Wanderer persona. And this is the final meeting in the cycle of these two sworn enemies of each other. And clearly, in this scene, the Wanderer has the upper hand because Alberich has been waiting. He hasn't been making the rounds of what's going on, and the Wanderer certainly has. And so they get into a kind of typical fight that they've had with each other many times, you can tell. So they get into it like they have before, and the Wanderer takes it one step further and kind of incites Alberich by waking up Fafner, the dragon, who's sleeping. And to tell Fafner that someone is coming to kill him. And of course, Fafner scoffs at this because nothing's going to hurt this big dragon. And the Wanderer makes some promises to Alberich about how things are going to end. Alberich disagrees with that, scoffs at it. The Wanderer heads off stage and Alberich is left. But it's interesting because in a staged production, you would have the voice of Fafner likely sung from off stage. So I'm curious, Raff, do you know what's in the plans yet? I know we're in the middle of rehearsals, and so what that means is that everything that's the same always is changing. But
things are evolving, and in fact, in the last few days, we've been trying to find the right Fafner effect.
Okay.
So the first stop was, of course, the option is to amplify it into the hall. Mm-hmm. But we're kind of trying to avoid that solution. We want to do something a bit more acoustic. And so members of our team have been out in Hong Kong looking for various kinds of megaphone. We started at one of the toy shops and brought a few of those back for our Fafner Falk Struckmann to experiment with, and nothing really worked. They were all a bit too toy-like, made of plastic, of course, which might affect the sound. And the latest experiment is with something much larger, actually. It looks like a sort of a metal megaphone, like an old-timey megaphone. And this is actually a practical chef's implement. I don't know if you've ever seen a French-style wedding cake called a Croquembouche.
I have not.
Which is a conical arrangement of profiteroles, all joined together by toffee. Quite a delicious thing. But to make this, you need a frame to put it on. And so what we have is actually a Croquembouche maker. And the Croquembouche go around that, and then of course you take out the metal piece. So this is the biggest sort of conical megaphone style thing that we've been able to find. It's made of stainless steel, so it looks quite spectacular. And if by the time of the performance we're still using it, people will see it.
Oh, what a great story. Thanks for sharing that.
My pleasure.
We also have another voice in Act 2, much later in Act 2, and that's the voice of the woodbird. When Wagner originally wrote this role, he suggested that it be sung by a boy soprano. I've never seen that in any of the rings that I've attended or worked on, so it's typically always been a high soprano, a light soprano voice.
This is actually quite an unusual part, and I had no idea that that was the origin of it. But that role is often sung by, of course, a light lyrical soprano. In the famous Schulte Ring, there's Joan Sutherland singing it, a very different voice type from almost everybody else in this opera and in the cycle.
And she's the first woman that we hear after about 2.5 hours of music sung by men in Siegfried.
It's about time to get some upper partials, some treble.
It's so true. Do you know yet where the woodbird might be positioned?
We think she'll be somewhere up high in the hall.
Okay, but we might want to leave that for a surprise for everyone.
People will have to spot her, maybe.
Oh, very good. Bring your binoculars, everyone. Let's talk about the orchestra, because as we get later and later in the cycle, the role of the orchestra becomes that much more important to the drama, but also that much more complex. And I think one of my personal opinions is actually that the score of Siegfried is the most difficult one to perform for the orchestra of all of the Ring operas. And that's in part due to its nature as a tragic comedy or comedic type piece, because this huge orchestra, how many players do you have on stage?
111 players for this piece.
Oh, so my goodness.
A huge number.
Sure, and we've got some special instruments too, don't we?
We do, and actually we have some new instruments in this year's production. In the previous 2 years, of course, I think we have talked about Wagner tubas, of which there are 4 on stage. In the previous operas, we've been borrowing them from Guangzhou. So that's involved somebody going and collecting them, of course. And it also means that the players have a little bit less time to really work on the instruments that they're going to be using in performance. So last year we had an appeal, and 4 very generous donors sponsored the purchase of a new set of Wagner tubas owned by the Hong Kong Philharmonic. They're on stage, and anytime we need a Wagner tuba from now on, we have them in the cupboard.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I know that must be such a relief for the players who can practice on them whenever they want.
Very popular. And then I was going to ask a little bit about some of the wind instruments, because we hear, in this act coming up particularly, we hear a lot from our cor anglais player, who's on the far right of the front row of the winds. And in this opera, we also hear a great deal from the player on the far left of the back row, and that's our bass clarinet player. These colors are so interesting, aren't they?
It's so true. And we started to hear lots of bass clarinet in Die Walküre, but Wagner really brings it up another notch in terms of its beauty and the haunting nature of these bass clarinet solos. And as a former clarinet player, I would just more and more bass clarinet makes my day. And I think one of the fun things, not everybody imagines the word fun when you think of Wagner right off the bat. But in Act 2, in a scene with that involves the woodbird and Siegfried, our hero, our cor anglais or English horn player has the opportunity to play very badly on purpose. And it's a wonderful light moment, in this 17-hour epic, heavy, wonderful cycle of operas, but it's a lovely moment when Siegfried is trying to figure out a way to call the bird and call the dragon and speak the language of the beasts that he has loved since he's been a child.
Just about the dragon and the characters that we're seeing here, a lot of this might be familiar to people from the Tolkien books and in the films Lord of the Rings, where there's a dragon, there's a horde, there are dwarves, there are mortals. There's kind of a lot of common ground here. Are these related in any way?
Yes, they are related. Tolkien knew about the Ring cycle when he was writing his stories, but Wagner wasn't the first person to use these stories. These come from ancient Eddic poetry. And there's Icelandic myth involved here, there's Germanic myth, and in the mid-19th century, sort of mid to late 1840s, when Wagner started conceiving the idea of the Ring, Germanic poetry of this nature and these myths were all the rage in literature. And so Wagner, who was seeking to create a new national myth for the country of Germany, which was not yet unified at this point in time, turned to these ancient sources. And so dragons, we've had them well before 1876 with Wagner. And Siegfried, our character, also a big source for Wagner is a story called The Boy Who Learned Fear, or The Boy Who Had to Learn Fear.
Yes. I think there's an English version of that, which is The Boy Who Could Not Shiver and Shake.
Ah, that's a new title to me, but it makes total sense.
Yeah.
And you see all of these commonalities through literature and through different kinds of art as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think we're nearly ready to go back in.
I think we are.
So, ladies and gentlemen, get ready for Act 2 of Siegfried, and we'll talk to you soon.